Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by his answer to oral question number 1 yesterday in relation to unemployed 15 to 19-year-olds? If we look at the Household Labour Force Survey, we see there are 26,700 people in the 15 to 19-year-old category.
The Honourable Paula Bennett on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, yesterday I corrected some answers I gave in oral question number 1. Phil Goff had asked me if I stood by my claim that 60% of young people not in education, employment or training are actually at school or at university. Since I have never in fact made that claim, and since the statement Mr Goff made was quite illogical...
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Thank you to my colleague for helping. But it was a very specific question about a number which the Prime Minister used, which is in the Hansard, and as far as we could tell, uncorrected later. And so it's a simple question: does he stand by that? It's nothing to do with anything that Mr Goff said.
I hear the Honourable Simon Power.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate that. My hearing of the Minister's answer initially was she said, I corrected part of my answer and then went on to describe, which actually does answer the initial part of the question Mr Mallard had set down.
Well, so long as that would be possible, so long as the answer that was corrected is this answer that this quote is taken from. And I just want the Minister to be sure that, because this quote is taken from an answer, I accept absolutely the point made by the Honourable Trevor Mallard, and off the top of my head I cannot recollect whether that was the particular answer corrected by the Prime Minister or not. So long as the Minister is certain that is the answer corrected by the Prime Minister in his subsequent, when leave was granted to correct the answer, then the Minister's answer is perfectly in order. But I do want her to be sure of that. The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I have been advised that the full quote was corrected yesterday by the Prime Minister when he came back into the House.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
In light of the fact that he has corrected that, is he prepared to correct the next sentence in his answer where he said, quote, of those 60% are in school, university, training or study of some sort, which leaves 15,000 in that category. Given that 15,000 out of 26,700 is 54%, not 40.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, this actually gets to the crux of the problem where the opposition are talking about, at times, about the unemployment rate and other times around the not in education, employment or training, and that's why the Prime Minister needed to correct his answer yesterday. So it's whether you are talking about the unemployment rate or talking about the not in education, employment or training.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
It was a very nice one, but it was a very nice explanation, again, not of the question that was asked. It was whether he stood by 60%, 15,000 out of 26,700, and whether he stood by the fact that that was 40%, or like most of us, does he make it 54%?
I mean, the quotes are quotes taken directly from Hansard, as I understand it, and if they were corrected, the Hansard would show that. And I'd ask the Minister to focus particularly on the supplementary that the Honourable Trevor Mallard has asked, because it did follow on exactly from this first statement of the 26,700 15 to 19-year-olds, so many are in certain places. And the question was, does the Prime Minister still stand by that? And I'd ask the Minister to be a little more specific in answering on behalf of the Prime Minister, please.
Point of order.
Point of order, the Honourable Paula Bennett.
May I seek clarification whether or not the member, because I need the first bit to make sure that I am clarifying that quote of whether it's the unemployment rate or the not in education, employment or training.
To avoid doubt, I ask the member to repeat his question, if that's possible, please.
Mr Speaker, I do repeat the question, and I'm giving the member the full quote again. That it's the next sentence in his answer, and I quote, of those 60% are in school, university, training or some sort, which leaves 15,000 in that category, end quote. Given that 15,000 out of 26,700 is 54%, not 40%.
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I stand by that 60% of 15 to 19-year-olds who are classified as unemployed in the HLFS are at school, university or some form of training and are therefore the answer to the question.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Does he still believe that 15,000 out of 26,700 is 40%?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I would not agree with the numbers the members just given.
Katrina Shanks.
Thank you.
Well, I think the member, didn't the Minister answer it? She said that she didn't agree with it.
She didn't agree with the figures I gave.
Order, we better not, order, let's come back to order here. We better not debate this. No, the member asked his question, as I understood the Minister's answer. The member asked, did the Prime Minister still agree with those certain figures? And I thought the Minister's answer was that didn't agree with those. Oh, that's good. But I might be wrong on that. But Katrina Shanks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the government consider youth unemployment rates to be a practically useful measure?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Prime Minister, no, because as I have said, a full 60% of 15 to 19-year-olds who are classified as unemployed in the HLFS are at school, university or in some other form of training and are therefore not a particular concern to the government. On the other hand, a lot of the young people who we are most concerned about are not technically unemployed according to the HLFS because they are not actually out there looking for work. So that is why the government prefers to focus on the NEET measure, that is, young people who are not in education, employment or training.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Does she agree with Statistics New Zealand figures that show that 58,000 15 to 24-year-olds are not in employment, education or training? And if not, what is the correct figure?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, broadly, yes.
Hilary Calvert.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister, does he...
Order, I expect members to show some courtesy. Hilary Calvert.
Does he agree with the statement made by the Minister for Social Development and Employment in relation to youth unemployment that we have seen a dramatic increase in the rate for 16 and 17-year-olds? If so, does he think this just confirms how disastrous Labor's abolition of youth rates has been?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, of the first part, yes. For 16 and 17-year-olds that are in the unemployment rate, that has gone from 28.5% in June 2010 to 33.6% in June 2011. However, what is interesting is 18 and 19-year-olds was 20.7% in June 2010 and is at 20.7% in June 2011. Both figures, Mr Speaker, too high and of concern. That's why we announced the package of reforms that we did on Sunday.
The Honourable Trevor... Katrina Shanks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Who are these young people who are not in education, employment or training?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I talked in detail about the 16 and 17-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training in my policy speech in the weekend. That leaves 18 to 24-year-olds. Of the 50,000 18 to 24-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training, 18 to 24-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training, I am advised that 70% are on a benefit of some sort, not including the DPB. So they will be people who are on the sickness benefit, the invalid's benefit or the unemployment benefit. That brings us back to the need for welfare reform, which is what the government has been focusing on. How can we get a lot more of these people off benefits and into sustainable work?
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
To the Prime Minister, why did he criticise Statistics New Zealand by saying its unemployment statistics are, quote, of no value for me, end quote, when he in fact got the figures wrong?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister came in yesterday and corrected one of his answers to his question that he is now standing by, and he is, the other answers he gave were all correct.
Point of order, Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
The question was very direct as to why he criticised Statistics New Zealand.
Well, no order. No order. Woo. But the member went on to say when he got his figures wrong, and the Minister, in answering the question on behalf of the Prime Minister, picked up on that statement included in the question and refuted it, which they're allowed to do. Question number 5, Tim McIndoe.